Disappearance After the Meeting Story by Miss You. The cozy cafe was the perfect backdrop for a date. Small, intimate, and filled with the aroma of freshly ground coffee beans. I remember sitting at the corner table, nervously stirring my latte as I waited. When they arrived, it was as though time slowed. My match was even more captivating in person. Warm eyes, an easy smile, and a voice that seemed to soothe the hum of the bustling cafe. The hours melted away as we talked. We laughed about shared experiences, swapped stories, and even planned a potential second date. When it was time to leave, they reached out, lightly squeezing my hand. "I'll text you tomorrow," they promised. I walked home with a spring in my step, giddy from the connection. The next morning, my phone sat silent. I hesitated, then sent a casual good morning text. No response. By noon, unease started to creep in. I opened the dating app to check their profile, but it was gone. Not just deleted, gone, as though it had never existed. Confused, I decided to revisit the cafe. Maybe they'd show up there again, or I'd find some clue that this wasn't as bizarre as it seemed. I must have looked pitiful when I approached the barista, asking if anyone had seen my date. The barista frowned. "You were sitting alone," she said. "Are you sure you met someone?" That's when the real horror began. Surveillance footage confirmed her words. It showed me sitting by myself, talking animatedly to an empty chair. I watched the screen in disbelief, my hands trembling. Had I hallucinated the whole thing? Was I losing my grip on reality? The answer came that night. A strange text appeared on my phone. It was never about the coffee. The sender's number was a string of zeros. I stared at it, dread coiling in my stomach. As if in response, the lamp on my bedside table flickered. Over the next few days, signs began to pile up. Scratched into the surface of my desk was a cryptic message: "You're chosen." Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of my vision. My dreams turned into vivid nightmares where my match appeared, their face distorted and eyes hollow. They whispered a language I didn't understand, but that left me waking up gasping for air. I tried to tell myself it was stress or a trick of the mind, but deep down, I knew. That meeting in the cafe wasn't a coincidence. It was the start of something far worse, and I wasn't sure if I could escape. Meeting in a Mysterious Place Story by Cloud. It started with an invitation. My match suggested an unconventional spot for a first date, an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. "It's quirky," they said over text. "A little adventure to break the ice." I was hesitant, but they were charming, and I didn't want to seem boring. So, that Saturday evening, I found myself pulling up to the factory. Its broken windows and rusted walls loomed against the fading twilight, and an icy wind seemed to whistle through its skeletal remains. They were waiting for me outside, waving with a wide smile. "Isn't this place amazing?" they asked, leading me inside without waiting for an answer. The factory was a maze of shadows and echoing footsteps. Our voices seemed swallowed by the vast emptiness, and the stale air carried a metallic tang. My date walked confidently ahead, their boots clinking against the floor as they talked about the history of the place. "It's been abandoned for decades," they said. "Rumors of hauntings, but nothing serious." That should have been my cue to leave. As we wandered deeper, I began to notice strange things. My date's movements grew erratic, darting around corners, disappearing for minutes at a time. Once, I thought I heard them whispering, but when I asked, they smiled and said, "What do you mean? It's just us here." But it didn't feel like it was just us. The factory began to change. Hallways stretched impossibly long. Doors I swore we'd just come through vanished when I turned around. The graffiti on the walls seemed to writhe in the dim light, forming symbols I didn't recognize. I tried to keep my cool, but my nerves were fraying. When I finally suggested leaving, their expression darkened. "Leave?" they said, cocking their head. "Why would you want to leave? Don't you like it here?" Their voice wasn't playful anymore. It was cold, almost mocking. I stepped back, but the sound of my boots didn't echo this time. The walls seemed to absorb the sound, pressing in closer. I turned and bolted. The factory became a labyrinth. Every turn led me back to the same hallway, the same broken machinery. My phone had no signal, the flashlight app flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. Behind me, I could hear their voice calling, echoing, but it sounded wrong. Like a dozen voices speaking in unison, distorted and overlapping. "You can't leave," they sang. "You belong here now." When I dared to look back, I saw them, or what used to be them. Their body was contorted, impossibly tall, their arms stretching and melding into the factory walls like roots seeking nourishment. Their face was blank, featureless, but eyes, hollow and glowing, stared back at me from the center of that emptiness. The walls began to pulse, like they were alive. The floor beneath me felt soft, almost wet. The building itself was no longer just a structure. It was a living, breathing thing, and I was trapped inside it. "You can't escape," they whispered, their voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "This place is Hungary." I don't know how I got out. One moment I was running, my lungs burning, my mind screaming, and the next I was outside, gasping in the cold night air. The factory was still there, silent and looming. But when I turned back to look, the doorway was gone. Just a blank wall of rusted metal. I don't know what that place was, or what my match truly was, but I know one thing for certain. It wasn't a person, and it's still in there, waiting for its next visitor. Mystical profile story by girl. It started innocently enough, like any night spent mindlessly scrolling through a dating app. A profile caught my eye, a smiling face that struck an odd chord of familiarity. I couldn't place where I'd seen it before, but something about it felt personal. The bio was vague, just a single line. "I see you. Do you see me?" Curiosity won over hesitation, and I swiped right. To my surprise, it was an instant match. The first few messages were casual, even friendly. They asked about my day, my hobbies, and my favorite childhood memories. But their questions were oddly specific, as though they already knew the answers. Still, I chalked it up to intuition or clever conversation skills. Then they sent the first photo. It was a picture of me, no older than 6 years old, holding a toy airplane in my backyard. The photo wasn't just familiar. It was mine. It had been taken by my dad decades ago and stored in an old family album that hadn't left my parents' house. My heart raced as I typed out a question. "Where did you get this?" Their reply came quickly, "From you." I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Could they have hacked into my phone? My computer? But that didn't make sense. The photo had never been digitized. Their next message came before I could respond. "You look just like your mom in that picture." I froze. My mom had passed away when I was 12. No one talked about her anymore, not even my closest friends. I was about to delete the conversation when another photo appeared. It was my mom, smiling on her wedding day. My hands trembled as I stared at the image. I hadn't seen this picture in years. It had been stored in a box in the attic of my childhood home. There was no way they could have this. No way anyone could. "Who are you?" I finally managed to type. Their reply made my blood run cold. "Family." Desperate to understand, I searched their profile picture online. The result left me breathless. The face belonged to my uncle, who had died in a car accident decades ago. But the photo was recent. It showed him older than he'd ever lived to be. Before I could respond, the profile disappeared. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. The next day, I began receiving emails from anonymous senders. They contained more photos, pictures of my childhood, of places I'd visited, of moments no one else should have known about. There were even videos of me as an adult, filmed without my knowledge. I tried blocking the senders, but the messages kept coming, now from different numbers and addresses. I called my family, desperate to confirm if someone had access to our home or belongings, but they were just as bewildered as I was. The final email came with no subject line. Its only attachment was an audio file. Trembling, I pressed play. It was my voice. "You can't hide from me," it said, though I had no memory of saying it. "I've been with you all along." The audio ended with a faint, low chuckle, one I didn't recognize but somehow felt disturbingly familiar. I've since deleted my account, but the messages haven't stopped. They come from unknown sources, from shadows I can't trace. And every time I open one, it's as though a piece of my life, the things I thought only I knew, is being unraveled by something that knows me better than I know myself. A Secret Cult Story by Rich. It began with an intriguing invitation. My match sent me a message after a week of chatting, suggesting a meetup at a private party for app users. It's exclusive, they said, a gathering of people like us, open-minded and fun. You'll love it. I was hesitant at first, but their excitement was infectious. The address they sent was for a grand mansion on the outskirts of the city. When I arrived, the place was buzzing with energy. Lights glimmered from the windows, and laughter spilled out into the night air. It looked like an upscale socialite event, rather than a simple app meetup. Inside, the party was lively. People were mingling, sipping champagne, and chatting as though they'd known each other for years. My match appeared almost instantly, their face lighting up as they guided me into the crowd. "Everyone's so excited to meet you," they said, their tone warm but slightly strange. "You're special." I shrugged it off, attributing their words to the flattering nature of a first meeting. But as the night went on, I noticed something odd. The other guests seemed to know far too much about me, details I hadn't shared on the app or with anyone at the party. They asked about my work, my family, even specific events from my past. One man leaned in close, a sly smile on his lips. "How's your sister doing after that car accident?" "Nasty business, that." I stiffened. My sister's accident wasn't public knowledge, and I hadn't told my match about it. Unease coiled in my stomach as I looked around the room. Every face seemed to be watching me now, their smiles too wide, their eyes too knowing. My match pulled me aside before I could slip out. "There's a little tradition we do," they said, their voice dripping with charm. "Just a way to seal the bond. You'll be a part of something bigger." They handed me a silver goblet filled with a thick, dark liquid. Its surface shimmered in the light, almost alive. "Drink," they urged. "It's just wine." But the smell was wrong, metallic and bitter, nothing like wine. I shook my head, trying to hand the goblet back. Their pleasant demeanor faltered, their grip tightening. "You don't want to offend anyone," they whispered, their smile now razor-sharp. "Do you?" Before I could respond, a low chant began to ripple through the room. The other guests had formed a circle around us, their eyes locked onto me. Their voices rose in unison, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. The air grew heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. I dropped the goblet and turned to run, but the doors were gone. The walls themselves seemed to close in, the ornate wallpaper shifting into writhing shadows. The crowd advanced, their faces no longer human. Skin stretched unnaturally, teeth sharpened, and their eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. My match was the worst of all. Their face melted and reformed, their body elongating into something monstrous. "You were chosen for a reason," they hissed, their voice a guttural growl. "There's no escape." The shadows swallowed the room, and I ran blindly, my heart hammering in my chest. I don't know how I made it out. One moment I was crashing through the darkness, and the next I was on the mansion's front lawn, gasping for air. When I turned to look back, the mansion was gone. Just an empty lot stood in its place, overgrown with weeds. I know they're still watching me. Sometimes I see shapes in the corners of my vision, or hear whispers in the dead of night. They let me leave, but I don't think I was meant to escape. Not completely. And I know, deep down, that someday they'll come back to finish what they started.